This video is now in session, and today I want to talk about the Georgia 2021 runoff races. And the short end of this is Trump definitely contributed to Democrats winning in the Senate. If it had not been for Trump's actions between November of 2020 and January of 2021, then Democrats would actually not be in the majority position. I would predict that Mitch McConnell would keep his majority leader position. But what we saw with Trump between the runoff races, between the general election and the runoff races, is just a constant annoyance in the minds of Georgian voters. A lot of Georgians started to get really mad at Trump, and we saw this with the 2020 general election. Biden won Georgia. There was a repudiation of Trump. So the last thing Republicans needed in this 2021 runoff races was more of Trump. If you try to have like a person advocate for you, but the people hate you, then you really should not be advocating for that person. And that extends to Donald Trump. And his blatant election lies helped contribute to this mess. Not only to the Capitol storming, but also to this election. And it was unfortunate that the Capitol storming overshadowed the news of how Georgia elected Raphael Warnock, which means that he is the first black senator from Georgia, and as well as Jon Ossoff, who is a Jewish person, 33 years of age, and the only person that has went into Senate at a younger age was Joe Biden. Now, I don't mean encapsulating all of history, but the last time the youngest person in the Senate was younger than Ossoff, it was Joe Biden. As you can see here, Ossoff won by 1.1 percentage points and Warnock won by 2 percentage points. I predicted that Warnock would have won and Ossoff would have lost. I was clearly wrong, and I was more hesitant to give the regular race to Ossoff primarily because Georgia didn't seem like it was trending quickly to the Democrats. And 2020 was a year where we saw a lot of advancements for Democrats that may have just been too early. Georgia is an example. I predict that Georgia will go through something more like a North Carolina. North Carolina, as you all remember, in 2008 went to went to Barack Obama by 0.3 percentage points. And that was when a lot of people thought that North Carolina would become Democratic. Now, in the 2012 election, Romney actually won North Carolina by lean margins, by over 1 percentage point, and this has continued on through 2016 and 2020. Now, North Carolina, I do think it will eventually trend more towards the Democrats, primarily because of the increased voting of the black voting group who vote incredibly towards Democrats, and as well as the Research Triangle area voters. Now, the reason why North Carolina didn't go Democratic in 2012 or 2016 or 2020 was just because of how much more conservative rural parts of North Carolina got. Even though the Democratic parts of North Carolina became more liberal, the Republican parts of North Carolina became more conservative. And this is something I would expect to happen in Georgia, at least for the short term. I think that Georgia in the next 8 years will go more for Republicans, but it will steadily come back for Democrats. 2020 was just a year where a lot of moderate Georgians really did not like Trump and as a result repudiated his policies. And it was primarily Democrats definitely contributed to the shift shift towards them in the 2020 general election race, but Donald Trump definitely helped accelerate that process. Had Donald Trump not ran for 2020 or 2016, then Georgia would probably be a Republican lean state with 4 percentage points for Republicans. But because of Trump, Georgia is now more or less a Democratic state. And this has been what Trump was doing. Simply his unpopularity had made a lot of states like Arizona and Georgia flip for the Democrats, and ultimately what he did to the Republican Party, especially with the Capitol storming that happened on January 6th, it really made a lot of people rethink about their stand-in with the Republican Party. We see this with Lisa Murkowski, who is now questioning whether she should stay with the Republican Party if she should join a different Republican or a different party. Now, if she were to leave the Republican Party, she would most likely not become a Democrat, but more of an independent who caucuses with a Democrat. And the reason why this would happen is primarily it's because of Alaska politics. Alaska is very negative towards candidates who have a D name attached to them, but for candidates who have an I name with them and that happen to caucus with the Democrats, then they become much more favorable. We saw this with Al Gross and as well as other candidates in the Alaska race. Most importantly, the Alaska state house races, where there were a lot of independents who caucused with the Democrats, and that made sure that Alaska retained their coalition control of both Republicans and Democrats. So, yes, I know this was a video about Georgia, but it has more or less turned into a reflection of the Republican Party. But so going back to Georgia, I think we see a difference where Ossoff gets less votes than Warnock, and the reason why this occurred is exactly the same reason why I thought Warnock would have won and Ossoff would have lost, which is simply that Kelly Loeffler is not a real incumbent, even though she technically does hold the Senate seat. She was not elected to this position by Georgians. She was elected by the state governor, Brian Kemp. And I just want to say a lot of the GOP governors have done a really bad job in appointing Republican senators. Like Doug Ducey nominated Martha McSally was a horrible idea in hindsight for the Republican parties. Now, the reason why, that's one reason. Meanwhile, David Perdue is an actual incumbent, and usually incumbents get more votes than those who, than their time when they're not in incumbency. Another factor is that Loeffler positioned herself from the start as an ultra-hard conservative. Again, she called herself more conservative than Attila the Hun, and that really did not strike right with a lot of Georgians. So those two forces combined together was the reason why I thought Warnock would have gotten more votes than Ossoff, and that turned out to be true. So I want to pivot this a little bit more from Georgia itself and more towards the actual Bible Belt and the Eastern Sun Belt. So this is the projection of the 2024 electoral map, and if we zoom in on the Bible Belt plus the Eastern Seaboard, then we can start to see some political trends happening. And what is driving this, I guess, force towards Democrats is primarily black voters, increased turnout in black voters, but also migration from the Northeast, from black voters in the Northeast back to the South. Decades ago, a lot of black Southerners started migrating north towards the Northeast, and a lot of them, especially young black individuals, started moving in recent years, started moving back to the southern part to the southeast. And that ultimately, if Democrats capitalize on that, that will be the reason why Democrats will start to gain a hold in the Bible Belt once again. The last time they really had a strong hold on it was 1976 in Jimmy Carter's election. Ever since then, Democrats have started to lose more and more of the Bible Belt. As seen here, in 1976, this is where Jimmy Carter won his election bid. Pretty much all of the southern states, the southeast states, plus remnants from Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas, they all went for Democrats. And this was really the last time that it went for Democrats in such a heavy way. Once Reagan ran, he was able to capture a lot of the Bible Belt, and come 1984, he was able to win all of them by safe margins. And even though Bill Clinton was able to get some of it back, ultimately this area has continued to stay Republican. Now that can change, and how does that change? Well, you take what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia and you multiply that among every single other state. You have places like Jackson in Mississippi, and as well as the western half of Mississippi, that votes more heavily towards Democrats. Democrats can capitalize on that with simply trying to get more of their voters to turn out. Even though Mississippi has been a very Republican state, it's able, I guess, in future years to actually become more of a swing state if Democrats realize that potential, because of the black migration that's happening from New York, from Pennsylvania to Mississippi to South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Florida. We see in the 2024 projection map, New York loses 2 electoral votes. Meanwhile, Florida gains 2, North Carolina gains 1 electoral vote, and South Carolina gained 1 electoral vote in between 2008 and 2012. So as a result, Democrats could capitalize on the migration to places like Jackson in Mississippi, Birmingham in Alabama, Nashville and Memphis in Tennessee, North Carolina. You have multiple places where this could be done. The Research Triangle, Greensboro, Charlotte. South Carolina, you take the remnants of Savannah here, and you also have other places like Charleston, where if you turn out those voters, then you could actually make South Carolina become a swing state. And Florida is just going to be Florida, so I'm going to leave it at that. But this is something Democrats could really try to do. And South Carolina has been static for some time, but if Democrats tried, then they really could get the staticness in the results for general elections to go much more in favor towards them, at least in South Carolina. In fact, if Democrats actually tried, then within 12 years, they could actually flip South Carolina blue. That seems very hard to grasp, but if we look in 2008, we saw how McCain won it by 5.2%. Trump here won by 11.7%. And if we look at the 2000 election, Bush won by 11.7%. So that's pretty much all I had to say. For Republicans definitely need to shift their language in Georgia especially. They no longer should position themselves as more hardline conservative, or else they're going to get themselves into a bigger hole. And they definitely cannot affiliate themselves with Trump in the future, because while that will help them in the short term at least retain the Republican coalition, that will in the long term fracture the Republican Party, and a lot of moderates will definitely try to get out of the Republican Party, forming a new party, and that would decimate conservatism in American politics. So that's all I had to have to say for this video. I know this was really more supposed to be a Georgia Senate runoff video rather than just a reflection of Alaska and the Southeast, but nonetheless, this is the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.